Welcome back to Confess TV, where reality becomes stranger than fiction. Today's confession will fundamentally change how you view trust, family, and the people closest to you. I'm about to present a case so psychologically disturbing, so morally bankrupt, that it will haunt your thoughts long after this video ends. Picture discovering that the person who promised to protect your family has become their greatest threat. Imagine uncovering betrayal so calculated, so predatory, that it doesn't merely end a marriage. It systematically destroys every foundation of trust your children have ever known. This isn't just infidelity. This is something far more sinister. What you're about to hear represents the absolute worst of human behavior, and unfortunately, every single word is true. Let's examine this nightmare scenario that someone actually lived through. The title alone reveals the devastating trajectory of events we're about to explore. So picture this. You're 41 years old, been married for 2 decades, and you think you know the person sharing your bed. The title of this confession reads, "My husband of 20 years is having an affair with our son's teenage girlfriend." Let me set the scene for you. Our storyteller, we'll call her Sarah, has been married to her husband Paul for nearly 20 years. They have 2 children, an 18-year-old son named Eric, who's finishing high school, and a 15-year-old daughter, Mary. Sarah describes herself as a stay-at-home mom, while Paul works in finance. Now, Sarah admits their marriage had hit some rough patches. You know how it goes. Work stress, time passing, the usual relationship wear and tear. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared her for what she was about to discover. Their son, Eric, has been dating this girl, Amy, since they were freshmen. She's also 18 now, and Sarah always thought of her as part of the family. That's what makes this whole situation so absolutely gut-wrenching. So here's where it gets sick. Sarah accidentally glimpses Paul's phone screen and sees a text thread between him and Amy. You know, their son's girlfriend. The message she caught? Amy telling Paul how much she missed pleasuring him. I'm keeping this family friendly, but you get the picture. Sarah's world collapsed in that instant. She spent the entire day attempting to rationalize what she'd witnessed, desperate to believe her mind was deceiving her. Unfortunately, her instincts proved devastatingly accurate. Digging deeper, she finds a computer folder packed with explicit content, plus saved photos of Amy from her Instagram. Not inappropriate photos. She was fully clothed, but the fact that he's saving pictures of his son's girlfriend? That's already crossing major boundaries. Then she checks his phone during opportune moments and discovers their ongoing conversations. Brace yourselves. These messages were filled with cruel comparisons between Sarah and Amy. Paul calling Sarah fat and old, while Amy responds with laughing emojis. Can you imagine reading your spouse mock you to your child's romantic partner? Here's the kicker that really sent chills down my spine. Sarah had found a thong in their bedroom the previous month that wasn't hers. At the time, she convinced herself it might be their daughter's, even though that made 0 sense. Sometimes we see red flags and our brains just refuse to process them. But wait, it gets worse. Sarah starts connecting dots and realizes Paul's suspicious behavior began right around the time Amy turned 18. Was this predator literally counting down the days until she became legal? The implications are absolutely horrifying. Sarah's sitting there paralyzed, knowing she has to tell Eric that his father is betraying not just their marriage, but their son's trust in the most devastating way possible. How do you even begin that conversation? Dargano, community response and initial evidence. The response from the online community was immediate and intense. People were rightfully questioning whether this relationship started before Amy's 18th birthday, which would make Paul's actions criminal, not just morally reprehensible. Sarah clarified that Amy had been 18 for 5 months when she discovered the affair, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly when it began because Paul regularly deletes his messages. Smart move on his part. Absolutely disgusting move as a human being. Sarah also updated everyone that she wasn't planning to keep this secret from Eric. She was just dreading having to destroy her son's world. She was playing it smart, though, staying quiet while gathering evidence to protect herself legally. The level of strategic thinking Sarah showed during this crisis is honestly impressive. While her world was crumbling, she had the presence of mind to document everything before making any moves. The investigation unfolds. 5 days later, Sarah posted her first major update, and honestly, the evidence she uncovered makes Paul look even more disturbing than we initially thought. Sarah's brother connected her with what she describes as a junkyard dog lawyer. Exactly what you need when dealing with a situation this complex. She systematically gathered evidence, screenshots of conversations between Paul and Amy going back 3 months, his call history showing hours-long daily conversations with this teenager, and here's where it gets really disturbing. Paul wasn't just fixated on Amy. This man was actively using dating apps, specifically filtering for women aged 18 to 22. We're examining a 48-year-old individual exclusively pursuing teenagers and young adults barely beyond high school age. The computer deep dive revealed an extensive collection of explicit content, sex chat room activity, and thousands of dollars spent on adult subscription services, plus physical evidence hidden around the house, accessories and costumes that painted a picture of someone living a completely secret life. Sarah picked up her kids from school and drove straight to her brother's house. Both Eric and Mary could sense something was catastrophically wrong. When Sarah finally told them everything, she broke down crying. Here's what really struck me. Mary, the 15-year-old, was actually angrier than Eric. Sometimes the younger siblings see things more clearly because they haven't been conditioned to make excuses for inappropriate behavior. Sarah made the incredibly difficult decision to tell Amy's mother everything. Can you imagine having to be the messenger for news this devastating? Amy's mom confiscated her daughter's phone and handed over the complete chat log to Sarah. What they discovered confirmed everyone's worst fears. The messages only went back 3 months, almost like Paul and Amy coordinated deleting their earlier conversations. Amy's response when confronted? She broke down crying, but insisted that her mother would never understand because she and Paul were in love. This represents textbook grooming methodology. Amy's mother revealed that Paul had strategically positioned himself as a mentor figure in Amy's life, systematically exploiting her vulnerability from an unstable home environment. This follows the classic predator blueprint. Identify emotional weaknesses, exploit them gradually, then convince the victim that the relationship represents something special and misunderstood. Amy maintained that their relationship only became physical recently, claiming Paul was just a friend and mentor before that. Even if that's true, which is questionable, it shows how he slowly built trust and dependency before crossing physical boundaries. When Sarah finally confronted Paul over video call, his reaction told her everything she needed to know. This man went into full panic mode, face red, sweating profusely, eyes showing both anger and terror. He kept screaming the word context over and over, claiming none of what Sarah discovered actually happened. His speech became stuttered and incoherent. When individuals are caught this thoroughly and their only defense involves claiming everything is miscontextualized, guilt becomes undeniable. Paul demanded to know where Sarah was and accused her of having no right to take his kids away from him. The possessive language there is telling. These children aren't possessions, they're human beings he traumatized. The call ended with Paul abruptly disconnecting, probably realizing he was only making things worse for himself. Sarah wasted no time filing for temporary sole custody of Mary and securing a restraining order. The authorities were notified about everything they'd discovered. Both kids showed remarkable maturity during this crisis. Eric requested therapy immediately, recognizing he needed professional help processing this betrayal. Mary channeled her anger into protective instincts, even recalling times she'd watched Paul interact with her friends in ways that now seemed inappropriate. The fact that Mary was reviewing past interactions with fresh eyes is so important. When we learn someone we trusted is capable of predatory behavior, it forces us to re-examine every memory through a new lens, Eric demonstrated incredible strength and level-headedness, despite having his entire worldview shattered. Sarah mentioned how proud she was of both kids' maturity, but they absolutely shouldn't have to be mature about something like this. This is trauma they'll carry for life. As the story developed, more details emerged about Paul's pattern of inappropriate behavior. Mary's friends confirmed they'd felt uncomfortable around him. He would position himself to stare at them, comment on their clothing, and ask intrusive questions about their social status at school. These weren't isolated incidents. Paul was systematically evaluating and objectifying teenage girls within his own home. The fact that multiple friends independently reported discomfort validates every parent's greatest fear about misplaced trust regarding their children's safety. Meanwhile, Amy remained completely under Paul's psychological control. Despite her mother showing her evidence of Paul's dating profiles and multiple affairs, Amy refused to believe any of it. She claimed the screenshots were photoshopped and insisted everyone was just jealous because she'd found herself a real man. The language Amy used, talking about taking better care of Paul than Sarah did, shows how thoroughly she'd been manipulated into seeing herself as the mature party in this relationship. Sarah moved forward with divorce proceedings, securing temporary custody and child support. Paul was legally prohibited from contacting the family, which, given his demonstrated behavior, was absolutely necessary for everyone's safety. What's interesting is that Sarah mentioned having overwhelming evidence that would get Paul in serious trouble beyond just the divorce. This suggests potential criminal charges were being considered. Both Eric and Amy attended the same junior high, but went to different high schools. Eric stayed in public school while Amy went to an all-girls Catholic school. They'd started dating the summer before freshman year, which means Paul had been watching this girl mature for literally years before making his move. Despite initially ghosting Amy when everything came to light, Paul eventually resumed contact with her. This pattern, withdraw when consequences appear, then return when you think the heat has died down, is classic manipulative behavior. Amy's situation became increasingly dangerous. She was spending hours away from home with Paul, despite her mother's attempts to intervene. Being 18, Amy claimed she could make her own decisions. But this wasn't an adult making informed choices. This was a groomed teenager unable to recognize her own exploitation. Amy's mother faced an impossible choice: kick Amy out for defying house rules and push her permanently into Paul's arms, or tolerate the relationship while hoping Amy would eventually see the truth. Just weeks before the divorce was set to finalize, Paul made a move that shocked everyone. He disappeared completely. After draining their remaining shared accounts, he bought a one-way ticket to Cambodia and vanished. Cambodia was chosen specifically because it has no extradition treaty with the United States and no child support enforcement mechanisms. Paul researched exactly how to escape accountability for his actions. The timing is crucial here. Paul wasn't contesting anything in the divorce, wasn't fighting for custody or assets. He was simply going to accept the consequences and move on. But something changed that made him run, and I think we all know what that something was. Amy was reportedly devastated by Paul's abandonment, which finally started cracking the fantasy she'd built around their relationship. Nothing says true love like your partner fleeing the country when legal consequences appear. Here's what renders this case even more disturbing. Cambodia maintains a documented reputation for child trafficking and exploitation. Sarah identified this connection, and it becomes difficult to dismiss the possibility that Paul's destination was strategically selected for reasons extending beyond simple legal avoidance. We're talking about a man who specifically targets teenagers, had an extensive collection of explicit material, and demonstrated zero remorse for his actions. His flight to a country known for exploitation of minors raises questions that are almost too disturbing to contemplate. Sarah tried pursuing FBI involvement and international investigations, but without provable crimes committed on U.S. soil, options were limited. Paul technically hadn't been convicted of anything criminal yet, just faced civil divorce proceedings. A year later, Sarah and her children are still in therapy. Eric is in college, keeping his distance from anything Paul-related, but still clearly processing the trauma. Mary continues having moments where she remembers past interactions differently, now understanding behaviors she couldn't contextualize as a child. The question Mary asked, whether Paul would ever come back, haunts me. These kids are living with the fear that their nightmare might not be over. Sarah's final thoughts really sum up the magnitude of this betrayal. She doesn't believe Paul fled just to avoid alimony. She believes he's a predator and a criminal who knew deeper investigation would reveal worse behavior. This case exemplifies every parent's most profound fear, discovering that someone entrusted with your family's well-being actually represents their greatest threat. The multiple layers of betrayal here transcend simple infidelity, revealing predatory patterns that traumatized several families simultaneously. Sarah's resilience throughout this ordeal demonstrates remarkable strength. She protected her children strategically, documented evidence methodically, and refused to allow Paul to control the narrative. Her compassionate approach to Amy's situation also revealed extraordinary empathy for another victim. For Eric and Mary, the path to psychological recovery will require extensive time and professional support. Discovering a parent's capacity for such calculated betrayal fundamentally alters one's worldview. However, with consistent therapy, family support, and patience, they can process and overcome this trauma. Regarding Paul's current situation, he remains somewhere in Cambodia, likely maintaining his victim mentality. The reality is that he represents a predator who devastated multiple lives and will presumably continue causing harm wherever he resides. This concludes today's examination for Confess TV. Share your thoughts in the comments regarding Sarah's crisis management approach. Should international cooperation improve to track individuals like Paul? How would you assist a family member in Amy's circumstances? Engage with this content if it resonated with you, subscribe for additional real-life confessions, and I'll return with another case